Okay. So, questions, comments. I'd like to really invite the floor first. All of you already knew all of this and everything is clear. Stefan.
I think it was really impressive how much is out there, and I never saw it in this very aggregated form. And we discussed now since some years, and we always mention this, not to reinvent the wheel is a very important aspect. And I think one exercise that should be done maybe at the first stage of going on with this inclusion of the other projects and networks is to compile some kind of big table or chart where we put in from which kind of institutions or networks we get information that we so urgently need. For example, the reach out to the national level, I wrote down, for example, the EEF or YALA Europe or Alternet or LTR Europe, or nearly almost of them, or reach out to non-English terminology, there was PESI, or reach out to this kind of expertise on multinational networks, Alternet and LTR Europe and MABEF and so on, or to social sciences and further disciplines. We also heard here quite some things. So all these challenges that we discussed in the breakout groups and that we discussed in the last years, to put the different kind of expertises there to have a starting point for going on.
Yeah, Carsten can construct another of his famous huge mind maps that cover the walls of his office. Horst.
Yeah, it's great to see you all up there, and also to listen to your presentations, that you are willing to be on board and to contribute, and also to, I mean, you are also here because you see for yourself or for your organizations that you will get benefits out of it. Now, if with a further development or with setting up a sort of a network of knowledge, there could be two approaches. One would be to go to a sort of a funding agency or funding organization and say, well, we have a certain plan, just provide us with some money, and then we will do something. The other option would be to have a sort of a bottom-up approach, that you all come together and say, well, let's do something together, and each of you puts something into a sort of a common pot to have a sort of a hub or a secretariat. Could you foresee that your organization could contribute in kind or in money to establish such a hub or a secretariat?
Okay. Would anyone like to begin?
Well, I hold the microphone, so I start. From my presentation, you may have seen that it is not very obvious from the European Commission to engage into such a process. So, of course, our presence here is showing that we are supportive, but at this stage, I think it is difficult to commit on any financial engagement, of course, and you perfectly know that, Horst. And for my position at the Joint Research Center, anyhow, we are not giving out funds as such, so, but other stakeholders are sitting in the room. But I think it's premature to give a statement on that today.
Okay. Anyone else? Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was clear from the presentations that everybody made that everybody was offering to contribute in kind. I think that was clear. Everyone was saying things they had to offer, but I'm not sure how many. No one's really standing up to offer money. But I think, you know, obviously the networking is of benefit to everybody here, but the primary beneficiaries of the network will be the policy community. And I think it's really up to the policy community to step up and find the money.
Okay. Further comments on this issue?
I'm not going to speak as a representative of EPBRES, but as a CEO of a research organization. I would like to stress that as a research organization today, we are involved in several research networks in which we are providing as well cash as in-kind contributions. And let's say from an organizational perspective and in financial difficult times, I think the message should be clear that it's going to be very difficult to finance another new network coming out from zero. That's the reason why I think, and there I can make the link with my role within EPBRS, is if we are able to build on the existing networks with their financial means, with the contributions we make from different research organizations, that there we have a chance that, let's say, financial contribution can be found from within the scientific community. But even then, that research, that financial contribution will have its limits, and finally, the financial mean should come from the requesters in function of the number of questions which are put forward towards the research community.
Others?
Yeah, thank you. For GBIF, I have two caveats. First, GBIF is an international organization essentially of its own, so it's a bit different from most of the other stakeholders here on the podium. As said, we will have our governing board, so we have to listen to our stakeholder, meaning the members' countries. And again, being a global organization, in plain talk, it would be difficult to or challenging to propose to do something, especially taking out financial resources just on a European level. Secondly, it's again from the core mission statement, it's about building and providing the data infrastructure. There have been constant approaches and even earlier one to do more than just providing data. But, and also, so to say, on I'm head of the German delegation to GBIF from the side of our research ministry, we have always tried to hold back these understandable demands. So again, also from that side, I would be cautious or careful that there would be, so to say, a majority to contribute directly financially from GBIF to an effort to reach out, to communicate and to talk to policy. However, now, so to say, the more positive or perhaps the way forward. GBIF, although it's global and because biodiversity, its threats and changes are regionally very different, has for some years taken a regionalization approach. So there is a European, not a European GBIF, but there is a network of European GBIF nodes. And I would, so to say, recommend that that would be the level to get involved in and keep talking to. And then again, you can actually talk to individual institutions in the European countries, some of which I could imagine could be certainly not open, but even be willing to contribute directly to the effort.
Thank you. Michael?
I think this self-organizing capacity of the communities has been pushed to the very edge so far. We have seen networks of excellence, and after 5 years run time with a major investment, several of them, they were left alone. And we saw the struggle over the past 4 years in Alternate and LTR to continue work on the basis of in-kind and very small financial contributions of individual institutions. I think looking into the United States, they have the National Science Foundation. And I think that the National Science Foundation, through minor investments into these organizing platforms, like a platform of networks we are representing here, leverage a huge investment then at the institutional scale and the scale of the individual projects and networks. And this is kind of complementary to our European ideas about infrastructure. And my idea was to understand that we are talking about a virtual infrastructure, and we need similar mechanisms as for the organization of European scale infrastructures, or just to expand the notion of the infrastructure by the virtual infrastructure and organizing this virtual infrastructure. But I think it needs a European funding scheme, a European platform to continue the work. So it cannot be left to contribute in individual institutions because it simply doesn't work, because the funding schemes are not fit for that.
Okay, Adrian? And also, are there questions from the web stream? Okay.
I'd like to shift a bit the focus of the debate, and I fully agree with Ole. It's a bit early to think about funding, and I think the most important part is how can we engage the scientific community? And I have a very specific question to you. How can you ensure that a real, transparent, fully inclusive, bottom-up approach is put in place? I mean, we've seen your presentation. It's a bounty of expertise out there, and it's excellent what we have, but how will we work together? How LifeWatch will work with the scientific community, how the other types of knowledge will be incorporated in the network of knowledge. I think that's our main question, and we have to try to, well, maybe you have answers.
Is the question somehow related?
No, it's been answered by Adrian.
Okay, can you then please...
The question was, sustainability was frequently mentioned at the conference. Will biodiversity knowledge resolve this or create another initiative that needs support? Can you use the microphone? Sorry about that. I'll repeat the question. So it's a question from Eike de Wever on Twitter. Sustainability was frequently mentioned at our conference, and she asks if biodiversity knowledge will resolve this or create another initiative that needs support.
Okay, that was partially answered by Adrian, but maybe we can come back to it. So, Adrian's questions. Any first mover? Jessica, maybe?
Well, for sure, integrating the other knowledge resources is definitely a challenge. But I can see that within the dialogue processes and the stakeholder involvement processes we have in the transdisciplinary approach, we have ways to do it. If that may answer your question, partly. I mean, it's not a challenge which cannot be overcome. And especially when we collaborate with different networks, I'm sure that there are possibilities.
Well, as indicated earlier during this meeting, we have been sitting together with a number of European networks, not all of them, to avoid that we had too big of a group to start with a number of initial ideas, in which we have been thinking how can we combine the existing budgets of the different networks, wherever that budget is coming from, and instead of setting up a complete new structure, how can we find a mechanism to combine those structures, and how can we redistribute the existing budgets in such a way that, without losing the specific functionalities of each of the individual networks, can put something which is more than just the networks. And let's say, as I indicated this morning, we have proposed yesterday during one of the breakout groups one such possibility. And I have to say that up to now we are getting very enthusiastic reactions from the networks of excellence, from LifeWatch and so on. So there is, I think there, whatever the final initiative is, there is certainly the willingness within the existing networks to have a look at a mechanism in which each of them can play a role without building a complete new network, because I don't think that is going to make it, because then you need new budgets, and that we are all willing to have a look how to redistribute the existing budgets in such a way that we can make this happen, and that we can make it happen in a durable, sustainable way.
Yeah. Okay, there's further comment at the back. Yeah. No.
I think Adrian's question has at least two dimensions. One is the structural one that Jürgen just referred to and how to organize this, and then the other one is on the procedural level that Jiska was talking to. And
I just like to ask a question about inclusivity, because you talk about the existing networks, and existing networks are by their very nature already have people in them. And so one thing that has confused me over the last few days is how you would actually make this more inclusive. And that's very easy to say, and it's very easy to say, you know, quite blithely in a plenary, yes, we will be inclusive and include everyone. But there's that is an extremely difficult thing, particularly in a fragmented landscape, is to include inclusivity in anything. So do you have any thoughts? Does anybody have thoughts about this? I know GBIF has struggled with inclusivity, and I just wondered what the panel thought.
Okay, while you think about this question, I'd like to make another remark to Adrian's point. I think just as someone wandering through the room and from group to group, one thing that came out of these very rough role-play exercises with playing through different questions is that if we would start putting this into action, we can I think we have a procedure designed that is robust, that is functional, transparent. We've been discussing and developing this. And I think by actually starting to answer certain questions, this will start creating the links within the network and bringing people together, and also creating the need for further outreach and realizing, okay, who else do we need to get in there? So in a way, I think it's like how brain scientists, as far as I understand how the human brain develops over time, that by using certain connections, you start building them up. And in that sense, actually putting the whole thing into action and use would help tremendously also to build this network of networks. Now, to the question on inclusivity. Anyone?
I think this partly reflects the answer to the previous question as well. Is that the challenge really is to make the network really open and transparent. I mean, it's been talked about a lot, but I think there really needs to be, if a request comes in, there needs to be an open forum within which that request is clearly discussed in an open way, so that people who aren't, part of one of the networks that's here, have an opportunity to put their ideas forward. And then there needs to be a structure within which those ideas can be considered, so that requests aren't just sort of always sent to the usual suspects, but that new and fresh ideas can be considered in that open process. But obviously that needs to be balanced with the structure to ensure that there's the quality control and the rigor. So I mean, we've discussed that many times over these days, but achieving that balance between quality control and openness seems to me the problem we have to crack.
Okay, further contribution from the panel for now?
Yes, what we have within the basic project is we have the mapping of the local knowledge with the pan-European checklist, and yes, in many cases we don't judge, we don't solve, we just have the mapping, and at both sides, so the pan-European the specialists can choose whether or not to use the local knowledge, and the local people can choose whether or not to take over the information from the pan-European checklist. So yeah, so you can always map the knowledge and the information in a way that you don't directly need to come up with some kind of label on the validity.
Okay, thank you, Carsten.
Maybe I can also add a little bit to both of the questions, because of course this is something that, well, the issue, first of all, of how to really bring the networks together and commit them to and help us, well, to develop this science policy interface, describe it very generally, and on the other hand, being as open and inclusive as possible, I think is of course two sides of the same coin which have major trade-offs. But I think we should also remember that we have to see this in the, I would even say, historical context that we are in. And the historical context is that 15, 20 years ago, many of our networks which are up here and of course that we are all in haven't been existing. And we have been developing as a biodiversity ecosystem services community into a real community over the last 2 decades. And this is a very, very, very short time. And of course, the networks developing are first of all, well, in specific fields, and now they're interacting more and more across this. We see this in science, but we also see this now in the needs of the science policy interface. And so we are really talking about the next step, and this next step also means that, of course, it needs a change in mindset of the people involved and of the institutions involved, that of course this openness is also not only something which you can provide by a platform and saying, look, everybody is open to contribute, but also in terms of the openness that people get proactive into that. And I think this is also something which needs change and which simply needs time. And this is just something, as also Heidi said, we need to develop this into a continuous process, starting with few questions, opening up to different kinds of communities, and not saying, okay, no, everybody is involved from the very first start. They need to get acquainted to the processes. They need to get acquainted. Oh, there's just another network. They need to get acquainted. We all need to get acquainted to this additional perspective. And I think this is really what is very interesting to me, seeing this developing over the last 2 and 3 years. And by the way, I think exactly in that development, IPBES will give us another push on that, of course, from the global perspective. But I think this will be developing as we have seen with the climate community 20 years ago.
Michael.
I wanted to come back to Adrian's question regarding the involvement of the scientists, like bottom-up in these processes. I think we have seen a lot of disenchantment of scientists with these networking activities because they don't see what's the added value for them to involve. And I think there are several mechanisms. First, it's all about impact points, so their personal careers depend mainly on the impact points. But there are now alternatives. You can have a DOI for publishing data sets. So it has become increasingly attractive also to publish data sets. And we discussed at the alternate summer school that there should be a mechanism for rewarding scientists in involving in the science policy interface, providing these really high quality papers at that interface, but scientifically so far there is no reward system. There is no impact point for cooperating, for involving in these synthesis science papers mainly. Yeah? So as long as they are not published in peer-reviewed journal. So I think we should think about mechanisms for rewarding scientists so they could put that in their track record, just following the logics of a scientific career.
Okay.
Yeah, one of the lessons learned on this is now we have, so yes, when we started at the Finalize database, we paid a specialist €5 per species, but they keep it running because they yes, for more than 40 years, because one of the spin-off of being being a specialist is that you will be a co-author of the data papers which come out of the database. And I think it's quite new that since 1 or 2 years we do have this e-journals where we can have a quick output in such kind of papers which benefit the people involved.
Yeah. So again, providing an early career perspective. I guess speaking to the inclusivity as well and the bottom-up approach. I think, I mean, there's this sort of really nice big family of networks presented up here, but sort of the early career experience, at least, the perspective there is that the landscape is incomprehensible as an early career scientist to get an overview of. And so I really think the sort of emphasizing that there's a need for whatever the structure is, a single entry point, sort of an umbrella in some sense, is really, it's essential from an early career perspective, and so I want to emphasize that. And I think there's also value in putting that back to the funders and saying, well, that you guys have a tool. If this is sort of I think maybe you're convinced that there's a bottom-up ambition to build such a structure. You guys have some tools to provide some incentives so that the networks start collaborating together and start building towards such structures.
Yeah, I have Estelle and then Alan.
Yeah, I just wanted to add on this inclusiveness question, and essentially my point of view is that it's a shared responsibility. I mean, you have on the side of the group that is initiating the first steps, you have the responsibility to leave doors open so that you have ways for newcomers to find their contribution, potential contribution, and how they could get in. But this is not just this group that has to be inclusive. It's from the side also of the people to have the responsibility to act as ambassadors, to be moving, like I would say, to mobilize around them as well, and to be willing to do this role. Because if everyone else, except the group that is trying to push this thing, is passive, waiting for the thing to do everything, well, nothing will happen. This is really a gravity system. We can initiate some kind of a dynamics, but people have to really take this challenge much further in their own communities. And I think, for me, the main challenge actually is not in our natural science community, because we have already started this gravity process, and all these networks that are sitting here are actually showing that they are moving within their own field and their own communities. But reaching out to social sciences, to economics, to anthropologists, to geographers, the ones who actually might have the methodologies to address other types of knowledge. Because I think when we say, how do you do with other type of knowledge, you have a natural science view on that. While you have experts who have been doing that for decades, and those ones, we are not reaching out to them right now, or just a little bit. And I think that's where the challenge is really right now in terms of inclusiveness. It's all of you who have the responsibility to try to reach out to those kind of communities. And for the people who are trying to initiate this thing, it's just to build in the structure and the processes, the opportunities for newcomers to get in. And I think it's a shared responsibility.
Okay, I have Alan next, and then Christoph, and okay.
Thank you. Could I make a couple of comments? First of all, in relation to issues such as inclusivity and transparency and so on, I would direct those of you who haven't read the spiral briefs, some of which are outside, to read them. They're only 2 pages long, and they discuss many of the issues that we're touching on here, and they're excellent for taking back on the plane. Secondly, and then to go back to 2 things, to Adrian's question about ensuring an effective, fully transparent process, including all forms of knowledge, is put in place. And maybe to link it to Michael's point about rewards, I'll make one observation that there is another network which is more or less missing, but it is represented here, and that is the institutional directors, those who have responsibility for the people who are generating and holding and disseminating knowledge. And I don't think we just have to reach out to them. We have to work really hard to make sure that they reward in the best possible way those people who are working for them. There is, to be frank, an institutional inertia out there. It is in many institutes' interests not to support this process. And we as scientists and those who represent the kind of networks that are represented here and the Commission must work hard to address this problem. The networks of excellence were an excellent, excuse the pun, step in trying to work toward institutional support for this whole enterprise. And we need to go back and work hard and play dirty and whatever to get them to support what we're trying to do. This is a fantastic conference. Just looking at the networks that are represented up on the stage here, it really is a landmark opportunity. Let's go back and get the institutional directors, and it's really encouraging to see there's one of them on the panel there, to work harder to support this initiative.
Okay, thank you, Alan. And Christoph and then Paola.
Yeah, thank you. Allow me to briefly address 3 issues in relation to these 2 questions. First, I think, as we all know and have been struggling with for long, biodiversity is the one field that has always, well, not failed, but struggling with to speak with one voice or to be visible in a very focused and clear manner. But let's be clear about it, it's part of the matter of the fact. Biodiversity is by orders of magnitude the most complex system we have on our planet. It needs expertise from many, many more disciplines than climate research or social sciences dealing with poverty or conflict or any other of the global challenges. So in other words, we have been struggling with this, and I don't think there is an easy solution out to be able to bring everything together that is relevant for biodiversity. But of course, we should strive to be much better than we have been in the past. Second, and so to say a slight corollary from that, because it's so diverse and so complicated, I believe there is good need and clear need for a second level of integration, for a NOC, for projects that do nothing but, or primarily, bringing these very different and very focused disciplines together. Again, that's, to me, different, but still very needed compared to the other environmental challenge areas. So, again, maybe there cannot be just one European network of networks, but we clearly need that level, at least in my view. Third point, and that's partly in response to Sandy Knapp's question, how can we be more inclusive or really inclusive? And I would put this, and that's purely subjective experience, down several levels. I think it's not so much at the project level, it's more at the level of the individual expertise. And perhaps also as a fellow taxonomist, I think we are extremely bad in being what I call aggressively territorial. I'm the expert on butterflies, so there cannot be any other. Or if there is any other, it's seen as a competitor, as an enemy, and not as a much needed collaborator. To me, this is a level where we can ensure inclusiveness. We have to stop claiming at the lower medium expertise level that we are the only ones covering or being knowledgeable in whatever it be, niche modeling for invasive species or butterfly in relation to climate change. Thanks.
Thank you, Christoph. Paola, you're next.
Yes, I'm not an ecologist. My name is Blonda, and I represented the remote sensing community here, which includes both researchers but also small-medium enterprises that can support with remote sensing technologies, biodiversity conservation and biodiversity monitoring. So I think that an additional component is the remote sensing community. And I'd like also to ask you if the network of Natura 2000 sites is represented within this large number of groups and communities, because we have some request from the management authorities of Natura 2000 sites. They need support in their commitments towards the Habitats Directive. So I can see that the ELTER site network is here represented, but I heard nothing about Natura 2000 sites.
Okay. May I add to this another question that links to that? I would like to add to Alma's request, because that's a very important thing. I was appointing, there are two representatives of the ENCA network, Bundesamt für Naturschutz and JNCC. They are here. The ENCA network, the ENCA is the European Nature Conservation Agency network. There are two representatives here. But to get the Natura 2000 sites into this network, with all the information that's there, you need the operational agencies. And that's a part of the biodiversity community that is mostly forgotten, and that also has the problem that they mostly don't, well, if you have the regional ones, there are about 120 of these agencies within Europe. And in Austria, they're divided over the Bundesländer, in Germany also, and in Spain they are divided over the autonomous states, in Italy over the regions. They're very dispersed, but they should have your basic data to build your knowledge on and to feed into what DG Environment wants to have for their policy making. That is one of the challenges that we have to get into a network of knowledge.
Okay, Stefan?
A direct answer maybe to Rob's concern. I'm also here, and also Michael Mirtl, my colleague, from the Environment Agency Austria, and we are part of this Anchor network. And we discussed before if it would make sense to have also a speed presentation about us, and we decided not to go to the national level for this session of the speed presentations. But of course, at least for sure, the Environment Agency Austria, but also the Anchor network is interested in taking part of the processes and supporting the further development of the process of the NOC.
Yes, if I can just respond to the question regarding the Natura 2000 sites. From the perspective of ECNC being part of a contract with the Commission at this moment, with DG Environment, in the process of, which is called the new biogeographical process. And I think this question is an excellent one in kind of reaching out and using the opportunity to have expert networks available in this process, because the process is towards supporting member states in their task of managing Natura 2000 sites. And this process helps them exchange information and knowledge and expertise among them. But what is missing is the direct connection to networks like the ones here on stage. So I think that illustrates also the need for, again, a kind of a harmonized approach to have access to these networks and make the direct connection to, in this case, a specific policy question on implementing Natura 2000. So thank you.
First.
Yeah, to follow up on the agencies. I mean, we have a huge number of agencies in Europe, but a lot of them have different makeups. Some are implementing agencies, some are also have a very strong research component. So for my agency, I would see ourselves rather on the demand side, the ones that formulate the questions to the researchers, because we don't have a lot of research capacity ourselves anymore. And so concerning the data, a lot of our data, national data and also regional data, are nowadays already in the European Environment Agency. So there's a lot of accumulation and a lot of reporting on other levels. And if we're trying with this network to solve, also to answer to European questions, at least our data are there on other bases. So you don't need to have to go back to the source of the data.
Okay. Further comments, questions?
Right. I'd like to come back to Rob Youngman's remark. I liked very much, and I think this is a good example why we need this close cooperation between the networks. Going back into the Natura 2000 question, it's extremely hard to know, for example, about the overlap between the European research infrastructures site-wide and Natura 2000. It took us, just for 200 sites, 2 years pushing people for metadata to let us know if their research sites were Natura 2000, 100%, 25%, 50%, 72%, and also get the expert opinion, for example, if their research sites would be in the vicinity of the Natura 2000, which would cover similar habitat types. So I think that this division of tasks and the working across the networks, also in getting a better picture of what's out there and what the potential of the existing infrastructures is a crucial point. And that's going to be a many years effort to improve the situation.
Okay. Would anyone like to come back to the remote sensing community? No context there, nothing?
Well, certainly in switching hats from this as the EU-born coordinator, that's in our focus and certainly something we also see as a big gap. Again, most of biodiversity people come from biology, which means on ground, on sea, on site. And yeah, GIS or remote sensing people usually come from geography or other areas, and both on a personal or sociological and also on a scientific level, we see this as a real big challenge remaining to build more bridges. And definitely, again, from side of our project, that's one of our focus areas where we need to bring more people together.
Okay. So next, Anne.
Thank you, Heidi. I only came to this conference today, so I don't know how far you have been discussing this before, but the big issue as far as DG Environment is concerned is the impossibility at this moment to access data from research projects which are funded by DG Research, so therefore taxpayer money. And so we are always told that it's the property of the researcher because they have to publish based on this data and so on and so forth. But I mean, when you wait for a few years, I guess that it could be fine for policy to get access to this data and information. And with all the information system which exists today, it shouldn't be a problem to make sure that some of, I'm not talking about the whole bulk, but at least some of the data which are policy relevant could be accessible by policy. And this is something that we raise again and again, but we haven't sorted out. And I think it should be part of the science policy interface as well. Thank you.
Yes, this is one of the problems we also now have with the development of the virtual labs. And I think this is one of the problems which will not be solved by talking, but just by doing. And well, I think when we can start some pilots on on solving some of the stakeholder questions. So maybe some of the questions which are on the board, and we can bring together people from the different networks and work on the development of the virtual labs. And when the whole the community will see, wow, this is great. This is how it should move. Well, I think most of the issues linked to the openness of data will solve.
Okay, thank you. Further comments on this?
From our experience in Marbev, I think also this often is the question of infrastructure too, and I think now we have the infrastructure. So when we, at the Marbev community, we had this infrastructure that one of the partners built, and the offer that we could immediately put data from the field in this database, and we could keep it for some time just to publish and everything, but it was already in the database. So from the moment that, a few months later or 1 year later, this will be discussed with the data managers, and immediately this was there. So there was no further work that was there already. So they could immediately put this data available for anyone. And I think this is also a question of sometimes it's not only the researchers don't want to do it, but they are already in the next project, and this is work to put this data available. So if they were available from the beginning, this will be a big step, and I think a lot more data will become available. Christoph?
Yeah, thanks, Anne, for that question. That certainly is also as something of high importance as we see it, and this is both with, so to say, my GBIF head and also from the EU-born side. I think it's a threefold issue. First, of course, it should, or there are policies out there and they really need to be followed up. It cannot be any longer that publicly funded projects don't put their data out in the open after they've finished. Full stop. And again, we just need to think about how to follow up at the different levels. Secondly, and that's perhaps something that can be followed up also by others, to put it on a more positive incentive side, as Isabel, I believe, has also hinted to, most scientists don't have enough incentives yet to just put their data out. They earn their brownie points by publishing peer-reviewed or high-quality papers. From the side of the scientific collections, we have been brainstorming, and this goes also to the GBIF community, how can we incentivize our folks, our scientists, when they invest time in just putting data out? That's generating new knowledge. That's something positive, but it's not currently in the evaluation scheme of a scientist at the institution. So in a way that perhaps goes also back to Alan's point, that's something where institutional directors and individual research funders could become more active and proactive and say, well, hey guys, you're in the future not only, so to say, evaluated by the number of ICI-listed papers, but also by the amount of genuine data or information you put out on an annual or whatever basis. And again, there are some initiatives underway which perhaps could be seen support. And third element, and again Isabel mentioned that, there has been, or there is always this constant rebuff, well, I'd like to do it, but I don't know how and where. Where can I put my data? So of course, we have the responsibility to have sufficient and easy or easily accessible data repositories for everybody and everyone. And again, honestly, or openly, GBIF is there, the number of other things are there, but for certain kinds of data, it's not quite straightforward yet in Europe.
Okay, thank you. Are there any more questions from the web stream? No? Any more questions from the floor? We're coming close to the close of this session. Adrian.
Again, a technical question. How far are we from a Cochrane kind of collaboration? I think we need here Karsten to explain better what that is. But I've learned about that, I think, less than a year ago in the previous Biodiversity Knowledge Conference. So, Karsten, the question was, how far are we from a Cochrane kind of collaboration in this setting?
Can also comment on that.
Well, I think I always said, well, we use the Cochrane collaboration as a sort of example for our endeavor here early on. But I think also we have to keep in mind that the starting point for that is extremely different. I think we have to bring what becomes clear here, not only from the discussions today, but also in terms of developing our process, using the methods, and so on. We have come a long way over the last years, and I think we have a very sound prototype to put this into place. But we don't have, of course, we still need to do this capacity building in terms of people getting acquainted to it, to use it. And this is a process which we cannot just do but just proclaiming it's there. Of course, even if we would have a long list of detailed procedures and rules, it wouldn't be enough. We need to have, and this became very clear tomorrow also, that we need to have capacity building of people getting acquainted to the things we are doing here, and then and we are developing here, and we are offering here, and then really, well, getting acquainted to these processes and having the capacity actually to deliver. And this is, of course, what Cochrane has been doing for quite a long while, and they have a very fixed context and concept of methods, which makes it much more easier for them. And if we could just say, well, every ecological data is in the sense that it can be used for systematic reviews, to do it very blunt, what the medicine people might have in Cochrane, which of course also is not completely true, but nonetheless they are really following a very strict line of methods. And in biodiversity we will always have the challenge that it doesn't make sense to say, look, this is our one-off method. We will always have this collection of methods using systematic reviews, using adaptive management, using other things that are important. So this would be my take on that, and this of course takes time.
I would add a few more details about that. I think the question you raise poses the question, the decision that whether we want to have. I'm starting again. In the Cochrane collaboration, you have what I would call thematic centers, because they have specialized. They have taken cardiology or embryology or neonatology, whatever, and they have these centers which are dedicated to that. That's a question. Do we want this kind of structure, or do we want something that is much more flexible? That's the first thing. You could have a center in Paris with a bunch of people. It doesn't mean that it's only French scientists or French stakeholders who would be involved, but that would be the entry point in Paris for agriculture and a subtopic of agriculture. But I don't know whether we haven't brainstormed about that. So far, it's more flexible, it's more open, and it could be more probably opportunistic too. So it depends where the money is, where the availability of people are, and it allows better flexibility. The second thing is, I agree with Carsten, the difference is also, and the challenge is also that in medicine they benefited from the fact that they have a large set of data that have been collected in a standardized way. And that's why they could develop these systematic reviews approach and other approaches, because they had this big amount of data, and so they could develop meta-analysis and this structured methodology. Andrew Poulin has talked about that. He's trying, he has been trying for years to adapt this methodology to ecological data sets. And we know already which are the challenges. And we know that in ecology we have small sample size, we have high variability, and we have, as in GeoBone and GBIF and all of these guys know the problem of interoperability of data sets. So we will face other type of challenges, and probably being flexible, be open-minded to innovation, and progress in the way we analyze data is going to be a major things to take into consideration.
Yeah. Okay, one last question, Kathy.
Yes, thank you very much. I just would like to stress that during these 3 days, we spoke about data, knowledge on biodiversity and ecosystem services, and how to deal with this kind of top-down request process and bottom-up answer process. But, okay, I synthesize, but not about the iterative process of knowledge co-production between scientists and policymakers. And I think about multidirectionality, dynamic process of knowledge production. So, and I do think that for the relevance and efficiency of the decision-making process, for the policy decision-making process, interpersonal connections are absolutely necessary. So it was just a general comment. If somebody wants to answer, to make some further comment.
Okay. Last opportunity to comment on this. Otherwise, I will do so. I think that's a very important point you're raising, and we've touched upon it in different points, and it also speaks to a lot of the other issues we've touched upon, that by starting this process and by working this way, We will generate also a new type of knowledge, and by making it transparent, we will generate a new type of knowledge and make that available. And it will also, this is also part of the capacity building that such an effort will create. And in this sense, yes, Cochrane is one building block, but I think we've moved quite a bit beyond that already at the conceptual level, also at the level of the different types of expertise and information and methodologies and data, etc., that is already organizing and constituting itself. And this is really now, as Jürgen put it yesterday in the debriefing, we're really approaching the moment where the only thing left to do is actually jump. With this, I would like to close, unless it's something really urgent you have to add on to this.
I want to support this, and what I wanted to have a comment on the same direction, because what we face in the case studies is that we cannot simulate dry all these issues that the NOC will have to deal with. For example, the commitment and engagement, we cannot reach the perfect level before it is in place. There are other elements like, for example, governance and guidelines and rules which must be perfectly solved. But some, like because Ellen said about the engagement of the institutions and so on, we will not reach the perfect level in drying it on a dry way without that it's really in place.
Yeah. But at a conceptual level, both the transparency and acknowledgement of contributions is there, the inclusiveness is there. And with this, I'd like to lead over to the next session that we will have after the lunch break, which is starting now, where we will focus on contributions and benefits from all the people in the room that are not up here on the stage, or on further things you would like to add with a different hat on. So please come back and contribute, and this is also an invitation to anyone out there on the web stream. If you have comments to add in terms of contributions to the network of knowledge and benefits you hope to get out of the network of knowledge, please help us to continue constructing this large map after lunch. So with this, we have 1 hour almost, and we'll meet back here at 1:30. Yeah, almost. At 1:30 to continue with the final part of this session. Thank you very much also again to the panel. It's really impressive to have you here, and we're really looking forward to, jointly jumping.